Okay. It is my privilege to introduce Nick. I think it's probably worth asking. Is there anyone in the room who doesn't know Nick? Raise their hand. Ah, okay. So there's probably no one more passionate about this topic on the planet than Nick. And I really applaud his personal energy and devotion to putting the U.S. front and center and his commitment to enhancing the strength of the U.S. So with that, I'll ask Nick to come up and introduce our speaker.
Thank you. Thanks, Teresa. They're very kind of you, Teresa. Thank you very much. Good evening to you all. I dress like this for a number of reasons, but the most important of which is I'm recovering from rotator cuff surgery. I'm about 8 weeks out of surgery, and I can't put a jacket on. This is about the closest thing I can put on as, to cover myself, which I do all the time because I'm constantly spilling things all over myself. But thank you for coming, and you're free to come tomorrow and wear whatever you're most comfortable in, because we need you comfortable to do the greatest amount of thinking for tomorrow. This is a very serious effort. As Teresa said, we had the pleasure of working together on making value for America, and when it came to this opportunity to build a follow-on to that work, Teresa was gracious enough to say that she was going to step up and chair this for us. There's a number of us behind her, way behind her, kind of pushing and nurturing and moving this along. I want to thank all of the people who supported us in this effort. We've made a crude attempt to put some of them up here on the board. We couldn't do this. I mean, I think you understand how this works. Everything becomes a fundraising project. Almost in everywhere you go. So we raised a reasonable amount of money to do this workshop and to get you all here tonight. So just maybe a little applause for all of these people. Forget the guy D'Onofrio, but for everyone else, thank you. Thank you very much for your support. Thank you very much for your support. We thought long and hard as a team as to how to kind of get us going this evening. How do we kind of get you jacked up for tomorrow and make sure you show up tomorrow? But more importantly, how do we get your head, on this topic? There's so many things that we could say about this issue of, do we have the right technical skills? How adaptable are we? What does that even mean? You're going to hear from me tomorrow, so I'm going to spare you tonight. But you're going to hear me talk a lot tomorrow about mid-skilled America. I am an engineer. It's not that I'm irreverent to the National Academy of Engineering, but I actually don't believe that's where the biggest problem is in this country, and I'll make my points to you tomorrow about why I believe that. To kind of give you more of a holistic perspective about what's going on and why you should care, and where real value is and how real value is created, and just how adaptable you need to be able to capture that real value. We went to the best person I know of to do that, besides myself, of course. And it's someone I've known for almost 15 years now, from the very first time that Frans and I got together. He's going to tell you all about himself because that's part of his story, and I'm not. He's an amazing and remarkable individual. He's done a tremendous amount. He's seen a tremendous amount, but he continues to push very hard on all of the right nerve endings around this issue of inclusion, around this issue of adaptability, around what does it take to actually build an innovation economy or company or country? And how do you go about doing that? And what do you have to think about? He was, for a number of years, my true north on trying to figure this out as I worked at IBM and as I did work here in Washington for the Council on Competitiveness for what was then called the NII, the National Innovation Initiative. So without any further ado, I bring you an accomplished writer. He tells me he was once an accomplished financial services person. I have no way of validating that. It's very possible he had a very successful career in the financial industry. I just have no way of validating that. I know he's an accomplished writer. I know he's an accomplished speaker. I know he's an accomplished innovator. I know he's a very clever guy. And I know he's my friend, Frans Johansson.
Wow, that was quite an introduction. Thank you, Nick. First, is this my sound pretty loud in here? Is it too loud? Because I can get loud. It's perfect. Okay, thank you so much. I got to be part of Making Value for America as well, and was invited by Nick to share some perspectives for that. And so it is an honor to be able to do so again tonight. You know, night talks are always a bit more fun. I mean, there's been some drinking going on. It's at the end of the day. So I am gonna keep things moving forward, but I don't want to dig in too much into details. I want to provoke instead. I would like to provoke you so that when you get to work tomorrow on these questions, you can attack them, perhaps with occasional fresh perspective. So that's kind of what I'm setting out to do now. But before I get into any of this, I thought that I should take maybe 75 seconds, and Nick talks about this. He's seen me do this before, but I think it's important. I want to take about 75 seconds, maybe 90, to tell a bit about myself, where I come from. I'm even interested in this topic. Does that make sense to you? Yeah, it's participatory. Okay. Yes. All right, I'll do that. The answer to the question where I come from is my parents. So you need to know something about my parents. My mother is black and Cherokee. My dad is Swedish. They met in Germany, obviously. That's where people like that meet, basically. But I was born and raised in Sweden, which is located here. Now, something about Sweden during the time I grew up in this country. Okay, Sweden consisted essentially of two groups of people. One group was blonde, blue-eyed, and quite reserved, and the other group was me, basically. I'm kidding. That was me and my sister. And this is my favorite hobby. This is my favorite movie. This is my college, where I went to college. I studied environmental science for the following reasons. And when I did that, I saw something quite fascinating. There are a lot of different scientific research at this campus, but I never really felt they were able to pull together the purpose of the research, and I wanted them to do that. So I created a science magazine, an interdisciplinary science magazine with that intent. It's actually celebrating its 21st anniversary this year, so it's still around, which is, thank you. This inspired me to start a healthcare company based on my aunt's research at Johns Hopkins. She was actually the first female black tenure professor at Johns Hopkins. And I had a lot of fun doing that. Then I went to business school at Harvard, started a software company, which did great until it didn't. And then I got an idea for a book. I'd seen that in my life, whenever I was able to combine the concepts from the different cultures I've been exposed to, or from different industries I've been exposed to, I had a better chance of breaking new ground. So I wondered, is that a generalized truth for innovation? Are these intersections truly powerful everywhere? I decided to research that, which took me far longer than I ever imagined. I was literally down to my $2 and 45 cents. Things started turning around. The book came out. and it did quite well. It's been translated to 19 languages at this point. I wrote another book called The Click Moment. I'm going to talk a little bit about that today as well as it relates to these ideas. Started a company called the Medici Group. We work with clients all over the world, which has been really terrific. In the middle of this, I got married. Now I moved to Brooklyn. Now I have a daughter. Actually, I have two. Now I'm here with you. This is my story up at this particular point in time. Thank you. Thank you. So, on June 12th in 2014, Elon Musk did something quite interesting. He took all the patents that Tesla had and he just opened them up, released them, gave them to the world. Why would he do something like that? On January 24th in 2017, Amazon was able to become the first streaming company that became a Best Picture nomination. What does Amazon have any business doing becoming a company with a Best Picture nomination? How did they do it? On February 24th in 2011, Airbnb reached its first million booking. 1 year later, it had 10 million. What did they do to grow that quickly? And on November 7th, 2017, Nokia reached a stock market valuation of $162 billion. Let's just say they haven't gotten back to that point again. Why? And today is November 2nd, in 2017, and we're going to explore the answers to these questions right now. And the reason we're going to do that is because if we want to understand the challenges that we face as a nation, as organizations within that nation, we have to understand the forces of innovation and what that means to our need to adapt. There's this little joke that I like to tell because, and you know, you should never open that way, okay? But if it's really good, you can. Basically, I'm often asked by would-be entrepreneurs seeking escape from life in huge corporate structures, how do I build a small firm for myself? And the answer seems obvious, because all you really need to do is buy a very large one and just wait. Something is going on right now, and it is actually accelerating. If you look at the average life of a company on the S&P 500, you will see a clear downward trend. Yes, it cycles up and down, but it is going, the overarching trend is that it's going down. And in fact, this is not a joke. The estimation is that about half of the S&P 500 will be replaced within the next 10 years. Half of the S&P 500 will be replaced within the next 10 years. It's quite a remarkable statistic. The fact is that the economy has never been this efficient. Never been this efficient at sorting out between those that can adapt and those that can't. It's almost ruthless in its ability to do so. And in a bit, I'm going to talk about why that is. So some of the forces that you recognize, and some maybe not. But this becomes the heart of the question of why we need to adapt. And you know, when I got the question when Nick called about adaptability, and then I had a few other conversations with folks here at NAE, adaptability is a tricky concept. I mean, it sounds obvious on the face of it. But like, do you adapt as an individual in the same way you adapt as an organization? I'm not sure that you do. I think organizations have other paths to adapting compared to an individual. So this whole idea around adaptability is, well, we need to figure out, what are we talking about? What about a nation? Can a nation adapt? I mean, if an individual is different from an organization, is a nation different? Now, I want to get to something that I think becomes a big issue in how we think about this conversation, which is that it is only natural to... Wow. Hello. Okay, so there's a screen over here. I'm going to do something here, just a little bit. Adapting to the situation. Okay. It's only natural to believe that the more expertise we have around something, the more likely we are to be successful. The first area to go to is to say, We need to understand things better. We have to learn things better. We have to go deeper into something. And it's actually an idea that has sort of had a long history of success, actually. Because all of you are probably here because you are deep experts into something. But what is going on with that idea today? What does it even mean to be an expert today? Several of our clients are in the retail space. I can ask 5 experts in retail what the future of retail will hold, and I will get 5 separate answers. And if I get 5 separate answers when I ask 5 experts, what does it even mean to be an expert? I mean, shouldn't one get kind of 5 similar answers? That feels like that's kind of what one should be thinking about. Now, the reason we think this way, and this is an idea that I talk about in my second book, is because we see that expertise works. And actually, we have all kinds of examples of it. Serena Williams is a perfect example of it. Serena is one of the best tennis players ever lived, in fact. She is an absolute expert. And her expertise is a function of how she practiced, how she trained. She says that she can't remember having lived a single day of her life without having practiced tennis. So, I mean, she should be way ahead of the game. Actually, there's a rule that got popularized a couple of years ago by Malcolm Gladwell called the 10,000-hour rule. How many of you have heard of the 10,000-hour rule? I've taken almost all of you. The rule essentially says that if you want to become the best in the world at something, then you have to practice for 10,000 hours or more at that thing. And the reason that rule works is because 10,000 hours is a lot of hours. Yeah. Like, she's just way ahead of everybody else. And this rule has been used in all kinds of different areas. The thing about it is, it doesn't really hold up. Not really. How many hours of practice did Reed Hastings have in video rentals before he started Netflix? Do you think? He'd rent a couple of movies. He didn't like it, so he started Netflix. Richard Branson, how many hours of practice he had running an airline? He started an airline with a lawyer. Like a lawyer. It's like, what's going on? Why is it that for Serena Williams, expertise is an ironclad rule of success? But for people in the world of business and more social activities, it isn't. The reason is because for her, the rules never change. These are the measurements of a tennis court, and they stay this way for like 100 years. This is a concept I talked about in Making Value for America. She knows exactly what she needs to do to win. Exactly. She just has to do that better than everybody else. You know, the rules in tennis were like, they've been so established that if those change, they're well discussed. I mean, there's a lot of conversation. In the 60s, if you served the ball in tennis, you need to keep 1 foot on the ground. Actually, they changed that rule in the 60s. So you could jump and serve. Wow. How can that keep up in this fast-moving world of tennis, right? The rules keep on changing all the time. How does it work if the rules of the game can change? I mean, that's really the question, right? So here's the Serena Williams of the mobile phone world. In 2007, about 10 years ago, they were 3 times larger than the next competitor. And they knew the rules of the mobile phone world cold. Phones were supposed to have cool colors, cool shapes, and cool ringtones. And then none of that mattered. Nobody cared about the colors. Black. Nobody cares about the shapes. Like rectangular, with or without rounded corners. Nobody cared about ringtones. It's apps. If the rules can change, then our ability to understand exactly what we need to do to be successful drops. I mean, it's a necessary relationship. I mean, you see how that flows. If the rules, and this becomes a challenge for us when we try to understand how to innovate, when we try to understand how to adapt. Now, you might say, maybe, or maybe Nokia were just idiots. They didn't see the writing on the wall, right? Here's a quote by a Nokia executive. It's a very insightful quote. We missed big trends, basically. That's from Stephen Elop, who was the CEO of Nokia at the time. But you know what? That quote is I kind of love that quote. Because what it suggests is that if we just seen the trends, we could have been successful. What did people say about the iPhone when it came out? Now there's an iPhone X out, right? Or 10. Is it X or 10? I think it's a 10. 10. And people can debate whether that's going to be successful or not. But when it came out, it changed the whole industry. Quickly followed up by Google. Within 2 years, right, the biggest players in the mobile phone space didn't even have a product 2 years earlier in that space. That's how quickly it could change. But what did people say about the iPhone when it came out? I mean, here's what CNET said, which was a leading tech site back then. Apple is slated to come out with a new phone, and it will largely fail. So it was wrong, right? Here's Bloomberg. Apple is unlikely to make much of an impact on this market. Okay, here's Ed Colligan. He used to be the CEO of Palm, right? We've learned and struggled for a few years here, figuring out how to make a decent phone. PC guys are not just going to figure this out. They're not just going to walk in. My point is not to make fun of these people. My point is simply this. They knew more about mobile phones than anybody else on the planet. So if they couldn't figure out what the next sort of step was going to be, who are you supposed to turn to? Who are you supposed to go to get the deep insight that insulates you from the issue of being wrong? The world is facing an onslaught of trends, of movements that makes it uncertain, that makes it unexpected. We have people entering the workforce in millions from all over the world, exceptionally skilled people. Everybody, or many of them, trying to figure out what's the next big thing. We have technologies that are accelerating at a pace that is incredible. People didn't talk about AI, well, they did, but not as much as they do today. Just a couple of years ago, now everybody's talking about it. Everybody knows what AI is, machine learning, deep learning. You need to if you're going to keep pace. Social networks enable network effects to happen. So you have an idea and it can spread very quickly. Airbnb in the normal world wouldn't have grown this quickly. But here's a tweet by the founder. This is actually a couple of years ago. Marriott wants to add 30,000 rooms this year. We will add that in the next 2 weeks. That's what happens in the networked world. Reid Hoffman at LinkedIn, he talks about the notion of blitzscaling. In other words, it change comes, an opportunity happens, it could grow at an absolutely astounding rate. Change doesn't have to be technological even. It can be behavioral. Parents always told you, don't step into a stranger's car. Now everybody does it nonstop. This is a behavioral change. And there's more liquidity than ever that can fund and fuel the growth of virtually any idea. Money is everywhere. Now, all this uncertainty means that if success is so unexpected, so I'm setting up the notion, right, that it is hard to understand where we're going to go next. And I'm questioning this idea that we can only, I'm not saying trends are useless, because I'm not saying that. In fact, I look into them a lot. But they're not the thing that's going to provide the entire solution, because we're going to be off. We're going to be wrong. There's too many forces around the world working, competing, building, anticipating each other, so that success tends to be quite unexpected. And then you're going to ask yourself, well, what are we supposed to do then in order to direct our efforts? In fact, let me state this a bit more provocatively. What is the point of planning anything or strategizing if the world keeps on changing as quickly as it does? Right? Well, there's a point to it, which I want to illustrate to you right now. I'm going to do it by having you play a game of rock, paper, scissors. So here's what I'm going to ask you to do. And I'm going to go through the rules, because it may have been a few years. You turn to the person sitting next to you at the table, and I want you to count to 3. You're going to go 1, 2, and on the third count, you're going to make a choice. You're going to choose either rock or paper or scissors. Rock beats scissors. Scissors beats paper. Paper beats rock. And if you happen to do the same, you redo until somebody wins. I want you to do best out of 3. So the first one to hit 2 wins, win, turn to each other, get going, now.
The club isn't the best place to find the lovers, so the bar is where I go. Me and my friends at the table doing shots, drink fast, and then we talk slow. Come over and start up a conversation with just me, and trust me, I'll give it a chance. Now take my hand, stop, and the man on the jukebox, and then we start to dance. And now I'm singing like, girl, you know I want your love. Your love was handmade for somebody like me. Come on now.
Are you still going?
Let's not talk too much. Grab on my waist and put that body on me.
All right, who's the winners? Oh,
Come
wait.
on now, follow my lead.
Give the winners a round of applause. Okay, give the winners a round of applause. Winners, raise your hands again. Just raise your hands again for a second. What strategy did you use to win? Cheated. It's the new one. Random. You can mathematically prove that the dominant strategy in rock, paper, scissors is to use a random strategy. Which is why it's rather curious to note that in the annual World Championships of rock, paper, scissors, of which there is one, the winners have never used a random strategy. And if you look at the strategy guide of rock, paper, scissors, of which there's also one, they don't recommend a random strategy. They recommend things like avalanche, which is rock, then rock, then rock, or paper doll, which is paper, scissors, paper. Why? When you know that randomness is your best move, you can prove it. Well, it turns out that no human ever does anything randomly. Like, we need purpose in our lives. We need something to, a rationale for actions. Even though that rationale, where does it come from? It might be different. Each and every one of us will probably have a different rationale for why we're here right now. The purpose of strategy cannot be to figure out the right answer. You're likely to be wrong, is what I'm saying. It's to convince yourself to act, to move, to execute, to test something. If we're going to understand the heart of adaptability, we have to understand this piece. Can we bring together? Can we coordinate action? Even if I can't, do I have enough to drive myself forward? Do I have a purpose for making a move? Because even if the best move is random, well, I mean, that's never going to work. That's never going to work. We're in an era of action, of testing, of doing, and it's not an accident. We're in that era, makers' fairs, there's all kinds of stuff that is indicating that we are executing. And the reason we're doing that is because the future is being discovered, the future is being created, not sort of for having a forethought about what it is. We're literally creating it as we go along. This is a really interesting piece that is happening right now. So what are the implications of this? I'm going to talk about 3. And why these implications differ from an organization to how we think about it as an individual and what that means for how we educate individuals. The first one is this. If the world is like this, if it is unexpected, if it's a VUCA world, and our need for adaptation is high, then for an organization to be successful, it has to assume that it can't know all the answers. So the more bets that organization places, the better off you are, because you're setting yourself up for a number of possible futures, not just one. Several organizations that we ended up working with are put themselves in a pretty pickle because they kind of picked one future, and then he went all down on that, and oops, that was the wrong future. But they couldn't bend the world to their will. Now, but this is not a new idea. In fact, I would say that out of all the innovation research that exists in the world today, this is the single most consistent finding. Okay? The people that change the world try far more ideas. This is true for entrepreneurs, artists, scientists. The more ideas you come up with and try to make happen, the better the shot of you being successful as an individual, in a team, as an organization. Picasso made over 50,000 works of art in his lifetime. Einstein published over 240 papers. Why do we see this correlation? Well, it comes back to the unexpectedness. They were not sure it was going to work. Picasso, when he created these, he's one of the most prolific, if not the most prolific artist who's ever lived. But many of his pieces of art collected dust in basements around the world. Do you know why? Because they sucked. It's true. We don't like to think of Picasso that way, but it's true. Do you know Einstein wrote papers that received 0 citations? I mean, now they're cited because we've done so many backward-looking things. But when they came out, do you think he planned that? Like, wow, God, I'm done with this paper. It will have no impact. No, of course not. He didn't know. Now, I mean, I have to say, it is quite remarkable that he, within the span of like a year, wrote 4 papers that pretty much changed the world. But it's kind of not the story we're told. Either when somebody like me speaks about why somebody was successful, or even in school, when we try to educate the future, they're more along the lines of, like, let's teach you how to, these are the things you need to do to be successful. And they tend to be far more rigid. How many of you play this game? I'm just curious, okay? Yeah, you can raise your hand. You've been to meetings. You play this game, okay? Yeah. It's one of the most downloaded games of all time. It's old now, obviously, but the reason I'm mentioning it is because it changed the way gaming companies thought about the possibilities of games. All of a sudden, the iPad, the iPhone was a viable platform in a major way. And if you play it, you understand why it was so successful. It's got cool colors. It's got like cool levels. You get to kill pigs with birds. And people said this is an overnight success. This Finnish company, Rovio, they nailed it. Not only that, their marketing plan was amazing. See, they first rolled out in the Czech Republic, made it #1 in the App Store there, which made it easier to make it #1 in the UK, which then made it easier to make it #1 in the US. Clever. Well, if they were that clever, why did they wait 8 years to do it? Because this was their 52nd game. And you haven't heard of the other 51. These stories are it's a survivor bias in trying to understand what makes us successful. The trend around smaller, faster bet will keep increasing. If you look at how companies are funded today, increasingly it's going from it's smaller and smaller increments, right? So now the stages, when I started my software company, it was like, okay, seed and Series A. Well, now there's like angel, friends, family, angel, pre-seed, seed, Series A. Like everybody's trying to chop these things up. And the reason why is because the world's becoming more unexpected. You have to place more bets. You have to be, it is a driving function of understanding our need to tame uncertainty, to tame the unexpected. And this has a huge implication for everything about adaptability. Because if a company is looking to adapt, it needs to take this into account. But the way an organization thinks about its options is very different from how an individual should think about it. In an organization, we can place lots of options. We shut things down if they don't work. Amazon. Okay, they sell books, great. But then they need to fulfill the orders of those books. This is a whole business, the fulfillment center. So they try that. Then they create web services. Amazon makes 150% of its profits from web services. I mean, it loses money. Bezos decides to lose as much money as the market says he can lose, basically. And then we have Prime Instant Video, which competes with Netflix. Which Netflix, by the way, runs on Amazon servers, right? So, it's intriguing. They create movies, Alexa, drone delivery. In some ways, Amazon has succeeded in their portfolio type of model. But many companies try to do that. And if you want to be adaptable as a company, it's a great way of thinking about it. You place bets, and you try to figure out what's going to be successful, and you use those to take off. But an organization can afford to think in terms of bets and options. I think it's much more difficult for an individual. I mean, how does an individual play simultaneously multiple bets? I mean, maybe if you are an entrepreneur that's been successful and has backing, but I think it's another thing that matters much more for an individual. For an individual, the question is not, can I operate like a company or an organization and place all these bets? It's about how quickly can I iterate myself? How quickly can I become a new version of myself, given the realities of what's going on around? Which brings me to the second piece, which is that a lot of focus goes to, here are the new skills that you have to learn, for instance. And that's great. That's great. But innovation happens when you combine skills. So the question should be, how do I use my existing knowledge base and add to that in a creative way? How can I combine something from a new field, a new industry, a different field, a different industry, a different culture? Because if I can do that, I can set myself up for success. And the faster I'm able to test these things out, the faster I'm able to cycle through on these options, the more able I should be to adapt to what the world throws at me, or maybe occasionally how I can create my own role in this world. And we see this play out. I mean, my first book was all about this, so the examples are everywhere. This is one that I like, simply because it gets the point across quickly. You have a hospital in the UK, and they have a particular challenge. When they're trying to transfer patients from the surgical unit to the intensive care unit, you have two separate teams. Two teams that have a problem communicating with each other, which leads to errors, and those errors can be fatal. Now, how should this hospital solve this particular problem? And you say, well, one way would be to talk to other hospitals. How have they solved their problem around this? What's best practices? But they didn't. Instead, they teamed up with McLaren to understand what happens at a pit stop crew in a Formula One car race. And once they looked at it that way, they realized that there are connections between that pit stop crew and what happens in the op room. And they were able to use those insights to drop the error rate. And so this pit stop model is one that's spreading in hospitals around the world today. You didn't have to be the best in how you thought about organizing a hospital. You didn't have to be the best in how you organize a pit stop. What you have to do is combine these skills. And the best preparation for adaptation comes from gaining these building blocks. How am I able to take what I know and add to it? I had a conversation right now about like this notion of that it could be digital fluency, for instance. If I have digital fluency, there's a building block that I might be able to attach to any number of different things that I'm trying to do. Education, I think, plays a huge role here. How do we prepare? How do we prepare a future to become adaptable? We should be thinking about it as in, if you have a particular skill set at time X, how able are you to see where you can take on another skill set and add to it, combine it to create something new? And then with this new thing, again, you ask the same question, again. And you're adding something else to that. And you're adding it not by addition. It's just like a language issue. You're kind of multiplying it. Because what you're doing is you're taking concepts to create something entirely new. We have to prepare our future, and by the way, we have to prepare ourselves, but also a future with these building blocks, recombination blocks. Which brings me to another point, because the question I would then get is, well, which ones should we have? And I know there's a point of view on that, so it's going to be talked about tomorrow. There's no doubt, for instance, that if you are not up to speed on some digital stuff, you're gonna lose out. This goes to one of those fundamental forces that are driving. But there's also something quite interesting in the unexpected. Training ourselves and our next generation to pay attention to and appreciate the unexpected becomes huge. We do everything but that. Much in life is based on the idea of a predictable path. What happens after, say you go to grade 4, what happens after that? Grade 5, that's right, grade 5. Boom. You know, it's remarkable to me that for a couple of years of our lives, we are extremely concerned about where we are at on a particular path. Let's say that you're in 7th grade, but you are at a 6th grade level of math. Massive concern. What do we need to do to catch up? Or let's say you're in 8th grade level of math. Well, that's great. We applaud it. And then all of a sudden it stops to matter. You're 19 years old, but you're at an 18-year-old's level of math? Nobody says that. Nobody even uses that language. It doesn't make sense. So somehow, up until this particular point, we care exactly where you are on this particular path, and then it doesn't matter at all. I'm not saying that one shouldn't be learning math. One should be concerned about the development of math. What I am saying is that if we want to prepare ourselves for the unexpected, for the unpredictable, then we have to be willing to acknowledge that we gain our insights, we gain our passions, we gain our knowledge in ways that don't follow necessarily a normalized path. But once you start to understand that the world works this way, you might question the unexpected. The outlier to me is the most interesting data point in a world that is VUCA. And we train to ignore it. In fact, I consider surprise a leading indicator of innovation. If something happens and you're surprised by it, it means that something happened you didn't plan for. Because if you planned for it, you wouldn't be surprised, basically. Finally, speed. Speed is the new IP. This is this new point that I'm making. So you should move at the speed of light. I don't mean literally that, for those of you that are physicists, but I allow myself some artistic freedom here. Speed is the new IP. What do I mean by that? IP is only relevant. Sorry, IP only matters as long as your idea or your product is relevant. If it's not relevant, it doesn't matter if you have IP, and the shelf life for relevance is shrinking. So in this competition between speed and IP, increasingly, speed is going to matter more and more and more. And yes, there's a discussion around patent trolls, there's a discussion around you have to buy 15,000 patents in order to settle things in court, etc. So all that stuff is playing out, but irrespective of it, speed is becoming the key. And if you're good at speed, and by the way, this is true for you as an individual as it is for you as an organization. So this one scales. Then you're setting yourself up to be adaptable. Which will protect you more, your IP or your speed? Even your education or your speed to gain new insight. Elon Musk did what he did, and one can argue why he released it. I mean, was it a publicity stunt? Maybe. Was it the fact that he wanted to get others to encourage them to create EV cars so that there's an infrastructure network that can be built out? Maybe. But in the big scheme of things, he's like, if the rest of the world is worried about those things that I did over there at that point in time, you can worry about that, because I'm worrying about that over there. This is how he sort of talked about it. You want to be innovating so fast that you invalidate your prior patents in terms of what really matters. It's the velocity of innovation that matters. Adaptability means that you are able to move at speed because the world is changing faster than ever. And hence it follows naturally that you have to as well. So, in the world that we live in today, and sort of is merging, I think it is a somewhat different world. Maybe I'm speaking simply because I haven't lived long enough and seen the mega trends that play out, but it feels different. I travel all over the world and I see similar themes coming up. Similar themes coming. Everybody's worried about education. I mean, you know, there is a lot of conversation here about the fact that we need to emulate certain countries' educational system. I spent quite a bit of time in Singapore. Actually, in the discussions around this there, the Minister of Education had this conference with thousands of teachers. And you know what they kept on asking me about? The educational system in America. Really? Yeah, because you guys become creative, you guys become innovative. I realized that we're like two ships crossing each other in the dark. We are looking there because we're seeing them being good at math and being good at certain topics. Singapore math is all over the place. I have kids in school. Singapore math, it's the greatest thing ever. And maybe it is. But every country is struggling with this. Every country is struggling with this. I think we have a good shot of getting this right, actually. I think we have a good shot of getting ourselves into position as a country where we will keep on taking what's really good with what we do, which is the creativity part, the innovative part, and push further. So that's why I'm excited. That's why I'm here. I love the idea that one can be able to make ourselves more adaptable. We can make ourselves understand the adaptable world better. So that's why I would say that the world is increasingly moving in unexpected ways, but I think we should move with it. Thank you very much. What was that? Yeah, just questions.
Since we are recording this, I'd ask you to use the mic. John?
I'm John Alec. Isn't most of what we learn learned outside of school?
Say that,
Isn't most of what we learn learned outside of school?
I think actually, Charles Darwin said, everything I've learned of value was self-taught. That was Charles Darwin's quote. I think that I would adjust it a bit and say that the things that we learn, particularly things that we do, and what he meant by that was to do. He talked about what he was doing when he was talking about that. Tends to be outside of school. School is not set up to enable us to do. And that's where I come from, to act. School, though, can provide us, if it's structured right, can provide us with models, right? With things that in which I can, it helps me to think about how to explore the world. There's elements that I've learned in school that I use today. I mean, I'm literally today, like as I was coming down on a train, I'm like, that's interesting. This is a concept that I was actually using Boyle's. Anyway, it doesn't matter what the specifics were. Somehow I was using that as an analogy to a particular issue that I was looking at. That was a school thing. But I do believe that whether we should change school, which I kind of think we should at least evolve it, most of what everyone is doing today tends to be self-taught, that gets us into a position. It shouldn't have to be that way. Certainly I think universities should be rethinking how they take on their approach. That's my belief. I think that it is structured according to a model that was optimized, 100 years ago, 200 years ago? Things have changed. And so I think there's room to do that there. But it's true for Charles Darwin. I think it's still true today. It's in the doing. It's in the acting. Yeah. Either one.
Are you going to say you're asking me the same question? I'm intrigued by your concept about the individual adaptability. As a result of your philosophies, are you doing something different to raise your daughters?
This is a good question. It is a good question. Well, different. I have two, and so I can't say I'm doing something different since it's the only daughters that I've been raising. But when I think about how to adopt these principles into it, then yes, I try to do it in a couple of different ways. One is the acting thing, like so action. Like we are encouraging them to, at night, I'm not there tonight, but if they take out, for one of them, she loves art. The idea of producing art is one that we're encouraging. Creating, like number of art pieces, in fact. And that it's okay, that in fact, to not attach too much emotional significance to any one piece of art. And sometimes they now think like, okay, this is okay, I'm going to scrunch this up and throw it away and do something else. These are elements to it, because what we used to do was take it and hang it up on the wall. Now you're like, oh, wow, that was okay. How do I do something like that again? It doesn't have to be that important. So we're trying to encourage them to try new things, incorporate new elements into what it is they're doing. If they're doing art, to go through a recycling bin and go through it and looking at elements that they can incorporate into it. Now they're doing that at a speed that is much beyond what I can even track at this point. So I have to figure out something else on what the next level is. But that has felt like that was an element of this type of thinking applied to it. Yeah, I'll say that for now. But it's constantly with me, and it's certainly impacted how we thought about schools. I will say that as well. Yeah.
That wasn't my question, but it may be the same answer, but thanks. I sit on a board of education, and we really struggle with innovation and adaptability and trying to just let our kids be more creative.
Yeah.
And thank you for your presentation. But are there one or two top components that you would like to see changed in public education?
Whew. Yeah, one or two.
I just start with one or two. I'm happy to take notes. But,
to take an analogy, obviously the U.S. News and World Report comes out, and it ranks colleges, and it ranks other schools too, high schools, business schools, masters. And what's interesting about that is that it has such dominance in that if you're a university trying to be competitive, you kind of know, it's the formula spelled out right there. This is what you need to do. So what's actually happening is it becomes a convergence of, like, schools are becoming more and more and more similar, simply because U.S. News and World Report is sort of driving that development. Okay, now, when I think about schools, I see something similar. It's this idea that I want to know, and parents we're all part of it, right? So I want to know if my kids are doing well in school. How do I know that unless it's in relation to what another kid is doing? So here's these tests, here's these other elements that sort of are really designed to compare and contrast. And what it leads to, in my opinion, is a slow, no one's making a big global decision, we all need to create the same, but step by step, everyone's making an individual choice that is bringing us together. So to me, I find this notion of the repeated, the massive testing, often requested by parents, very problematic. To me, that is a big issue. The second thing I would say is that we are, and I mean, this may sound like old news, but man, do I think it makes a difference. We are encouraged to think, we all know that what we're passionate about, what we care about matters. As we get older, we increasingly understand how much it matters. My God, like, if I'd only known this earlier. And we just get it beaten out of us in school. And then we have to, like, relearn. We have to go on this whole journey to relearn it. So maybe like by the time we were like 40 or 50, we're like, yeah. Like, I think the school can play a role in keeping that piece not just alive, but front and center. Someone would say, well, okay, well, how do you do that? Does it have to do with the quality of the teacher? Does it have to do with the curriculum? Well, okay, so I think one can experiment around that. But that passion piece, being able to have that drive you, is huge. There was one more thing that was you said top two. There was a third one that speed, and the abolishment of perfection. So school is about being like 100% right. I mean, in fact, it's great. I mean, like 100% is 100%, and then like 90% is, but real life isn't really about that. Real life is about maybe getting it to 80%, and then you iterate, then you do something else. So somehow we have to learn that. When we work with, very successful companies, executives are actually just beginning to understand what it means to do something that's not completely perfect. And that gets just beaten into us very, very early. Problem is, of course, that if any one school decided to sort of change it up, they need a lot of confidence to stick to that, because measurements get made. This is the U.S. News and World Report phenomenon, right? So it is almost as if you would have to get a couple of schools in a specific region. Like, you have to almost form a coalition where you can say that there are a couple of things that we want to experiment around, and these other things. But we all know that it's not going down the right direction.
This all sounds terrific for countries that look like us, that are, democratic in principle, republics in form, and
in principle, yeah.
Yeah, and protect your individual freedoms. And I know you think about this. So contrast this to China and to Russia. And how are they doing as well as they're doing? And what are they doing, to the best of your ability? Because it can't quite be what you're talking about.
So let me just talk a bit about China. Russia, I don't know that much about. In fact, I wouldn't. What I do know, well, let's just leave them out of it for a moment. There's something about China that makes me think about the United States. In some ways, the United States is like the greatest accident in history. You have a massive landmass where everybody speaks the same language. And if you start a company here, you can scale. Like, you literally don't have to interact, well, you used to anyway, not have to interact with the world at all. Until you build enough scale, so now you can take on the world. And guess what? Your competitor is in France, and it's kind of like this, and you're like this, so boom, you're pounding them with scale factors, et cetera else. So you have all this stuff. In other words, the United States has a lot of things going for it. But one of them is the ability to scale large before you tackle competitors outside of the country. Of course, like, a company has to go global earlier and earlier in its sort of life cycle. So we're seeing a shift there as well. But in my mind, we see something similar in China. So a Chinese company literally does not have to interact with any other company in the world until it reaches a tremendous scale. And now, with that scale, it has all the scale powers that come along with it. And now they can go after other parts of the world. So you kind of, in my mind anyway, from what I'm seeing, is that if you're talking about a population of billion plus, contiguous landmass, same language, roughly similar cultural understanding, you can scale companies there. And those companies can then go after other parts of the world in a way that we did here in the States. And, if you look at the future of that, it seems to me that China is benefiting essentially in a way that it hasn't really played out in the West by spending a lot of time keeping other companies at bay. so that their own companies can reach a particular size. And then sort of go after other parts around the world. So that's one explanation that to me has felt like it has some power anyway to understand the rise of Chinese companies. But that said, I'm going to add one other. Where are the innovations happening? They're happening they're not happening all over China. They're happening in areas of China where you would have, certainly by Chinese standards, quite a bit of diversity. Chinese nationals have returned back, a lot of them, and they have spent their formative years in the States, most likely. It may be in Europe. They may have done a startup or two. They may have been part of a big company. They may have been, but then they go back. In fact, China encourages them. They pay for them to go back. And now you're getting a mix of insights that drive, like accelerates innovation. We have benefited from this type of thinking for a very long time. Except very recently, we somehow have decided that this sort of surefire bet on driving innovation seems to be a bad idea. But it comes from the combination of insights across cultures, across fields, across industries. The only shot we've got is to keep, in my mind, keep accelerating that. And ultimately, that's where China has to go. And so, finally, it's going to have to adjust. You're already seeing Chinese companies that are trying to make it abroad. They're having to adjust how they think about their own corporate policies, their own internal cultures, because it's not going to fly when you come to Europe, for instance, or the US. You're going to look back and say, well, what are you actually doing? It's early stage. I was having a conversation with Matthew Bishop, who runs the economist here in the United States. He's saying this is it seems like a very early trend in what he's observing. Companies in China, in India, that are having to adopt a more, let's call it more tolerant corporate culture. But that influences employees, that's going to influence their competitors in those countries. So in other words, in the long run, if we trust the notion of inclusion, if we trust the notion of diversity, you will probably see companies having to adjust to that as well in the long run. Consumers have that much power now. They're punishing companies that are not sort of adjusting to that. So that was I baked in a lot of things into that answer. Anyway, that's what I'm observing.
I think we've got time for just one more.
I'll answer shorter, okay?
Okay. We're going to go over here.
Okay, you pick.
I don't know that it'll actually be a short one, but we've talked about education. We've talked about the Chinese and what they're doing. What I see and what I do, our youth are more than willing to adapt. They will change. They want to change.
Yep.
They want to grow. They want to learn. What I run into are the older companies, the parents, the grandparents are the ones who stifle that. What would you suggest for us as industry and as educators to help facilitate, change the language, change the message?
Wow. First of all, I agree with the notion of what we're seeing with the youth. People talk about the millennials or the generation prior to. In our company, the most astounding people that we have are those that are kind of just joined, like 1, 2, 3, 4 years out of college, and it's just it blows my mind about how they are taking on new challenges. So I agree with that assessment. I think companies have to themselves truly reevaluate what it means to set yourself up to place bets for the future. And what I mean by that is that the insights for those have traditionally somehow come from this hierarchical structure. Like, if you've been here, if you're at this level, you have the right to give me an insight. And like somehow, but if you're here, you haven't earned the right to give me an insight. That piece has to change. The insight, not only can it come from anywhere, but in all likelihood, some of the greatest insights are coming from here. And companies have not come to understand what that means. They have not come to trust what that means. Instead, it's in massive investment across the board in a structure that has been built that really is, its primary purpose is to maintain that structure. And I'm not sure what to say other than the methods we've used, for instance, has been to actively involve, for instance, millennials, if we're going to focus on them as a group. Like they become almost like it's an explicit thing in which insights from millennials get brought into a company or into leadership or something like that. And it sometimes creates a bit of friction because people are like, wait a minute, you just jumped. Why are you talking to the CFO? I haven't even met the CFO once. I think that there's going to be a lot of different models in how to adjust it, so there's going to be a lot of experimentation around it. But I agree with you. This is one of those things that's going to separate those companies that are able to adapt to those that aren't. It is very obvious that you have to take insights from where you can get them.
I'm afraid we've reached the witching hour, and we're going to have to cut it off here. So give Frans another round of applause.
Thank you.